Hello, everyone, and good afternoon. Thank you for joining our webinar. You've got your email, Now What? My name is Peter Schmidt, and I'll be moderating our webinar today. I'm an Associate Client Manager at Change.org, where I work alongside the rest of our client services team to help organizations recruit high-quality supporters and develop email strategies to convert these supporters into long-term advocates. With me today are two fantastic speakers who are going to share their insights into cultivating these supporters into advocates or donors, some best practices for segmentation and targeting your audience, and tips for maximizing engagement through the welcome series. We have with us Blake Groves, Vice President of Strategy and Business Development at Salsa Lab, as well as Tammy Ho, Lead Client Manager at Change.org, here with me in our New York office. I'm going to give Blake and Tammy each of them to introduce themselves, and then we'll get right into it. Blake, would you like to start?
Sure. Thanks, Peter. Thank you, everybody, for joining. My name is Blake Groves, as Peter said. I've been helping nonprofits with online marketing for about the last 15 years, so I've been in the space for a while. Very passionate about email list growth and all things associated with that. And today we're going to be talking about what to do as you add names to those lists, how to engage them in the follow-on. So really excited about the content.
Hi everyone, I'm Tammy Ho, Lead Client Manager at Change.org based in New York City. I've worked in the digital fundraising and marketing space for 10 years now, exclusively with nonprofits, and I'm also really passionate about email marketing. So I'm very excited to be here today. Throwing it back to you, Blake.
All right, thanks, Tammy and Blake. Before diving into things, here's a quick outline of how we'll be structuring our presentations today. Blake is going to start us off with a discussion of how to attract, cultivate, and convert the right supporters. In this section, we'll answer questions such as who should your emails reach, what sort of actions do you want them to take, and what are these new supporters going to be expecting from you and your organization. Tammy is then going to take us through a deep dive into the best practices for your welcome series and discuss two case studies, Autism Speaks and PETA Germany, to highlight how following these best practices can take your new supporters from one-time action takers to dedicated long-term advocates. Tammy will answer questions such as what sort of call to action should my organization include in the first welcome message, or what items of my messaging should I be testing to maximize conversion rates. We'll have about 20 minutes for Q&A after Blake and Tammy have presented, so be sure to enter any questions you may have into the chat box in ReadyTalk, and we'll answer those later on. And now I'll hand it off to Blake to get started.
Great. Thanks again, Peter. So again, as I said, a big advocate of growing your list. I think it's an important thing to do. Be happy to talk with anybody later about ways to do that. And obviously, Change is a great resource for you when it comes to list growth. But what we really want to talk about today is I've gotten somebody to sign up at my website through whatever technique I've ended up using. What is it that I want to do now? And I want to sort of paint the framework, talk about some of the best practices, some of the things you should be approaching, and then we'll get into some specifics, and then as we said, we'll even dive a little bit deeper as we go further into the day. So the first thing that I want to talk about is obviously getting somebody to sign up at your website is not the only thing that you wanted them to do. That's usually just the first part of a multi-step approach that you're trying to get them to do something beyond that. That could be donate, advocate, volunteer with your organization, whatever it is. You need to draw them to your presence. You need to build a relationship with them over time, that cultivate step. And then ultimately we want to convert them into some higher level of action. As I said, I think the most common one we tend to talk about is donations, so I'll use that for a lot of the conversation today. And we tend to think of this in this sort of linear format, that I want to bring them in, engage them, and then get them to do something. But what I really want us to do is change that thinking and thinking of it much more in this type of a cycle. Because as we spin through this, what we find is we're really moving people up the value chain and through this process on a relatively continuous basis. And so by that, I'll give you a really classic example is I want to bring somebody to my website and I want to get them to sign up to receive emails from me. So that's the first part of the attract, cultivate, and convert. I want to get them to the website. They see compelling enough content that they want to continue to receive information from me. But now they've become an email subscriber. I want to drive them back and maybe get them to fill out a survey so I know more about them and I have a better understanding of what they're interested in. I want to keep running through that cycle so that I move them through the process from website visitor to email sign up to survey taker to first time donation to second donation to recurring donation and possibly on to planned giving. I just kind of ran through that very quickly, but you can see I want to change the thinking that we continue to think in more of this cyclical form. And when we do that, it helps us look at these different pieces and make sure that we're planning ahead of time. I can't expect to get a large influx of email addresses and figure out over the next couple of weeks what I'm going to do with them and then try to do something. I've already lost my window of opportunity. This needs to be really a seamless, continuous flow. So I've planned my campaign, and as part of that planning, I actually have already planned the email follow-up ahead of time before I even launch the campaign. Then you'll see over there, I'm certainly familiar, at least every organization I work with, I have yet to run into an organization that has extra time, resources, or money. Everybody I work with, they're all great. They're all understaffed, overtaxed in terms of resource constraints. So we want to try to automate as much of this as possible so that I can plan it, I can put it in place, and then I can just kind of fire off the campaign and let these things run their course. So this is the kind of thing that we're going to be talking about. We're going to take a look at some of these different steps. But before we do that, I wanted to get an idea from the people that are on the call how you feel your communication is today. So we've got a couple of answers here. It's well planned. We're ready to go. We're sort of middle of the road. And then the last one is we really need to improve it. Just kind of want to get an idea of where the group sits. And as it's going, it's looking like we're getting most everybody middle of the road. We're getting kind of the traditional bell curve here. Now great and well planned is starting to fall seriously behind. Okay, so I would say the vast majority, and I'm sure we haven't gotten everybody to vote yet, but that gives us a representative sample. And you can see here that the vast majority say, we're kind of doing okay, but we would like to do a little bit better. At least that's my interpretation of it. So that's perfect for what we want to talk about today. When we talk about our communications, I want you to think about a couple of areas, and I'm going to go into some more specifics on these here in just a few minutes. But what is it that you're ultimately trying to get this person to do, right? The end game. What am I trying to get that first-time donation, but I'm starting with the email subscription as my first conversion? What is it that I need them to do now, and what is it that I'm ultimately going to want them to do down the road? When am I talking to them as it's related to something they just did? So is this my first communication with them after they signed up, or is this my third communication? Has it been a week, or has it only been a matter of minutes? We're going to talk a little bit more about who I'm talking to, and then I'll get into some targeting and segmentation techniques. How am I communicating with them? Is it simply via email? Am I using multiple channels? Are they engaged with me in other areas? The where question is not talking about geographically, not where they are physically at, but really where are they in this journey with me as an organization? Where are they moving through this process with me? And then the last one is really critical, and we'll readdress it later, which is why do they want to engage with me? Very few people wake up in the morning and say, I just can't wait to go donate to a nonprofit. Let me get online and see if I can find a nonprofit as quickly as I can so I can donate. They want to engage with people about something that's important to them. They want to feel that they've made a difference. They want to feel whatever it is. There's different reasons that they're involved with your organization, and trying to understand that can be really critical. So these are some of the things I want you to think about. One of the things I want to make sure that we don't do is this. And quite candidly, I see this very commonly with many of the organizations that I work with. Do not send everything you have to everyone on your list. It's very tempting to just say, well, effectively my emails don't cost anything, so I might as well blast out more of them as long as I've got the names. Well, while it doesn't really cost you much incrementally to send that extra email, supporters are very expensive. And I can easily fatigue my list by sending everything to everyone. Probably the most common question I get whenever I do email seminars is, how much email is too much? How much can I send without fatiguing the list? And I will tell you that is 100% driven by relevance, not frequency. If I send you information you want, you'll want to get it as often as I can send it. If I send you information you don't want, one time can be too much. So we really do need to take a step back. Even though it's easy to send everything to everyone, really we need to not do that. Because email is cost effective, I don't have to ask for money every time I talk to someone. I can use my email to keep people up to speed. I can use my email to keep people informed. I can use my email to thank people. I can use it for a lot of things. So we should do that. We should break out of the habit of only thinking of communications as a fundraising tool. And I'm not sure that people are doing that, but I just caution you against it. And then lastly, don't rely on one-shot approaches. Don't simply send your email out, check your results, and then call it a day. You really want to have that circular approach, that campaign concept of bringing someone back into the fold, driving them up that ladder of engagement, and continuing to increase the value of both their involvement with you and their affinity to your organization. So let's talk a little bit about the who we mentioned before. When I'm looking at a list of emails, it's very hard for me to differentiate one name from another. And I encourage you to think more in these terms. If you actually think about individuals, even only a representative few, it makes this point much clearer. So when I look at these three pictures, we've got the gardening granny, we've got the new mom, and then I guess the third guy, we'll just call him the overly emo guy in the bar because I'm really not sure what exactly he is doing. But it is very clear to me that I would communicate with each of these people in a specific and unique way. I would have a different message for the gardening granny than I would the new mom, than I would the guy in the bar. That's almost intuitive that I would just approach them differently. So start to identify those groups and understand if that is the type of message that's appropriate for that segment, or if I need to adjust it, and figure out who are your key segments. And in just a little while we'll get into some things that can help you identify who are your best key segments. So let's take another quick poll here. And do you already think you know which group of supporters you have are your biggest supporters? And by biggest, I don't mean largest number. I mean most adamant. Could you easily, if I told you, I want you to email your best supporters, could you easily do that? And this is encouraging. So again, I'm going to rephrase the question as, if I asked you to email your most adamant supporters, could you easily do that in your system? And I'm seeing mostly yeses. And we'll get just a couple more votes in here, and we'll call it representative and look at the results. So here you can see the yeses are winning by a large margin, which is great. Quite a few I'm not sures. That's an area that we definitely will want to explore more. And then several no's as well. So this is something that we're going to want to dig into a little bit more when we talk about targeting and segmentation. All right. So I touched on this before. What is it that you want these people to do when you're communicating with them? Are you just trying to get more information about them? Do you need to gather information? Are you trying to fundraise? Is that what you need to do? Obviously, we all need to do that in our roles, and I understand that we may need to do that through the email communications. It's a great way to do that. I was just cautioning you not to only do that. Do we also want them to help spread the word? Do we want them to advocate on our behalf, not in the traditional advocacy sense, but putting the word out in social media through their own circles, helping us grow our presence and our visibility by spreading the word within the areas that they are working with? That could be something that I'm specifically wanting them to do. So if you think back to that slide that was the circular campaign with the multiple steps, really understanding how am I going to drive them through to this point, what is the very next action I want them to do, and then moving them forward. And the reason I want you to focus on that very next action is if I take the example of website visitor to email sign up to survey taker to donor, people will often focus on that last one, the donation. Well, the techniques, the motivations, the things you need to do to get me to sign up to give you my email are very, very different than the things you need to do to get me to give you money. So we need to focus on that very next step and understand how that fits into the process. And as I mentioned before, this is probably the most critical question, which is what is it that they want from you? And it's not just a tax receipt. It's not just a place to give money. It is an experience of some kind, a connection of some kind, whether it's their personal connection to your cause or whether it's they want to make a difference in their local area. Whatever it happens to be, trying to understand what it is that they're wanting from you can make a huge difference in how you communicate with them going forward. All right, let's talk about targeting and segmentation. This is my favorite example. It's amazing how well this works and how applicable it is. But when I work with animal-oriented organizations, if they send a dog message to dog people and a cat message to cat people, it will double their response rate. We have seen this time and time again. Doubles the response rate by doing this. You'd be amazed at how many people don't do this. They still just email everything to everyone, even though it's much less efficient and can tend to drive people away over time, as I said. So this is an easy way to double your response rate. If anybody's wondering, I will tell you now, dog is the correct answer. I'm sorry for the cat lovers on the call, but dog is the right answer if you have to pick between one of these two. Certainly, at least if you're emailing to me. We have 3 shelter dogs, and I believe my wife just signed up to foster a mother and 4 puppies when I get back from my trip. So we will have a busy dog house. Obviously I'm kidding. Cats are great too, so I don't want to get angry cat letters, which I have gotten in the past. However, what I challenge you to do is identify the dog and the cat in your organization. I guarantee you there is a single attribute within your organization that will drive this kind of level of response. It could be whether I have kids or not. It could be whether I know someone who is afflicted with the disease that your organization works with. It could be that I live in a particular neighborhood or a particular area. I don't know what it is, but you should know what it is. Identify what this one criteria is that's going to really change the way that you would talk to these people and start to target and segment on that criteria. The other thing, I'll give you a quick little exercise you can do, which is come up with 3 ways to segment. One is interest-based, so that it's this idea, am I interested in dogs or I'm interested in cats? Another is activity-based. The easy one there is donate. Have I donated or not donated? But it could also be, have I visited your organization? Have I ever participated in the type of activity that you guys do, whatever that may be, some sort of an activity-based segmentation. And then the last is sort of the catch-all. That's where you get into, do I have kids? What geographic area do I live in? And I would encourage you to come up with your top 3 in each of those 3 categories, and that gives you a really good starting point on a very well-run targeting and segmentation approach. Welcome series is the idea of when I come on board, you're going to talk to me about specific things. I really don't want to spend any time on this because you're going to get a great presentation on this in the second half of this presentation. But the idea here is that there is an automated set of emails that only go to what I would call new on file, new names on file. Again, I don't want to go into that too much, but what I want to do is take this campaign approach and give you a different real-world example that wasn't a welcome series, but it is a multi-part campaign, which is the same concept. It's just that a welcome series is a very specific one. So I was working with an organization. It was an end-of-year campaign. They had a well-targeted list. They had good messaging, so they were doing a lot of things right in the beginning. It was not a huge organization. They sent out message 1 to the audience represented by the 6 boxes there. I don't remember the exact audience size, but the return was $1,800 in gifts. So message 1 received $1,800. And as I said before, with a one-shot approach, many organizations would just call it quits there. They'd say, okay, this is what our campaign did, and here's how much money it got. But what this organization did was a week later, they filtered out the people who gave to message 1. So you see that message 2 had a slightly smaller audience. And they sent message number 2, which got almost the same results as message number 1. A little bit higher, but statistically we'll call them the same. Then they waited another week and sent message 3 only to people who had not given to message 1 or message 2. Interestingly, you see here that message 3 outperformed message 1 and 2 relatively significantly, to the tune of, when you combine these 3 messages, they actually got 4 times the amount they would have gotten with just message 1. We also find this to be very, very consistent. These multi-part campaigns can drive up your results 4 times. Now, caveat, I am not asking you here to send everything multiple times to people, because that can also fatigue your list. But if it's important to you, take into account this multi-part messaging and the ability to ask multiple times. Also, don't limit yourself to fundraising. This could be used for helping to spread the word as well. All right, I don't want to take up too much time because I want to get it over to Tammy real quick here. But last thing I'll tell you to do is a sort of a guerrilla exercise. Go get a free email from Gmail or Yahoo or wherever you want to get an email from, and sign up with your own organization and sit back and watch what happens over the next 6 weeks. Don't stack the deck and send yourself great messaging that's custom tailored to you. Obviously that wouldn't help anybody. But just sign up, do it kind of under the radar, and see what the experience is, and that will help you determine, is this the kind of experience I want to present to new supporters, new people that are coming on board. All right, and now I think I will turn it over to you for this first poll, Tammy.
Great, thanks Blake. You had a lot of great points on attracting and cultivating supporters. So let's kick off our discussion with a quick poll so we know where the group stands. And the question we have is, do you send a welcome series to all of your new supporters? We have yes, it's great, yes, but it could use some work, not yet, but would like to, and no, we don't have plans to. So the responses are coming in. It looks like most of you are in the not yet bucket. So that's great, because I'm going to do a deeper dive into the welcome series and look at why your organization needs one, assembling your content, and following best practices. We'll round it out by going over case studies from Autism Speak and Peter Germany. And don't forget, everybody, that you can submit any questions into ReadyTalk. So let's get started. First of all, I want to address, what is a welcome series? It's the who, what, when, where, and how of your organization. And this story can be told through your mission and reinforcing your mission in a variety of engaging ways. But beyond its physical makeup, the welcome series is a relationship building tool. It should pique interest and give your new leads reason and inspiration to keep engaging with your organization. I like to think of it as the courting period for your new leads. So bring your A game and put your best foot forward. Right now, you might be wondering, do I need a welcome series? Well, the answer is yes, whether you have a multi-channel acquisition program or simply an opt-in form on your site. You need a strategy in place to welcome your new supporters. Onboarding is the first step in developing a great relationship with your new leads, because it's likely that a handful of these supporters will become fantastic advocates, donors, or even both of your organization down the road. So don't skip this important step in your communication strategy. Here I've outlined 3 steps to success in creating your welcome series. Number 1, plan ahead. Blake also talked about this in his plan the follow-up slide. The welcome series is a crucial component, if not the key to your cultivation strategy for new supporters, so it shouldn't be an afterthought. Take the time to brainstorm with your team before the start of each fiscal year or even each quarter, and look through your content and see what's performed the best. And then use those pieces as a launching off point for your welcome series. Number 2, create an evergreen welcome series that can be used year-round, and then tweak it for different audiences. And number 3, timing is everything. The sooner you can follow up with supporters after their initial action, the better. And that's because your organization is fresh on their minds. So leverage that timing and don't give them the opportunity to wonder how you got their email. Now, depending on the number of emails you include in your welcome series, I recommend spreading out communications over a 4 to 5-week time frame. But use your best judgment on volume and frequency based on your regular online communication strategy. And a bonus tip, make sure to segment and suppress your new leads from other communications, because you don't want to interrupt the flow and momentum of their welcome series. Okay, so what about content? Well, great news. Your content already exists. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. Most of the time, you can just repurpose what you've already got. You can check your website, your annual report, your direct mail, and your online communications for stats and human interest stories. You want to use eye-opening stats. A great one I came across today was, did you know that 59,000 homeless New Yorkers will spend their night in a shelter tonight? This is an attention-grabbing stat, and it makes your supporters want to learn more. And then next, you want to identify human interest stories that embody your mission and connect your supporters to your organization. because you want to make an emotional connection. Do you have a story about how an issue impacts an individual or a family, and then how has your organization helped? That's a human interest story because you're putting a face to the issue. And then make sure to include a call to action in each message. Start with a soft ask or a low bar ask and lead up to that high bar ask. Examples of soft asks are join us on social media, watch a video, or sign a petition, or even a photo sharing campaign. These call to actions are really great because you're asking people to engage with you on more than one channel, which sets you up for multi-channel communications and helps you drive your messaging. Next, we've got a saying on the client services team at change.org, and it's ABT, and that stands for always be testing. Earlier, we talked about how using your best performing content to assemble your welcome series. But don't stop there. If you want to know what resonates with your audience and what type of content gets results, you need to always be testing. You can test almost anything from subject lines to images to button color and even tone. We're really lucky to live in this digital age where we have access to real-time results and learn lessons quickly. So this isn't the same as testing a direct mail package where you have to send it out and then wait for the reply slips and then analyze that data months out. When you're testing your email welcome series or any other email, as a matter of fact, you're hitting thousands of inboxes and tracking those results as they come in. So oftentimes you'll see a clear test winner within 24 hours of sending out an email, which means that you can use this data to drive your strategy immediately. And now at the rules of testing. Number one, always test one variable in your communication. And that's because you want to isolate that variable. Don't test more than one component at a time because it's going to affect outcomes. Number two, track your results. Is it statistically significant? Use those results to help you make decisions for future campaigns. And then number three, what does success look like to you? Are you focused on open rates, click-through rates, or conversions? When you've honed in on your success factor, it can help you decide what to test and which metrics to focus on. So now that we've talked through the nuts and bolts of the Welcome series, let's take a look at case studies from Autism Speaks and PETA Germany so we can see best practices in action. First off, we have Autism Speaks. The goal of the organization is to change the future for all who struggle with an autism spectrum disorder. They launched a campaign on change.org in February leading up to World Autism Awareness Day on April 2nd. And their sponsored campaign petitioned President Obama and the US Senate to make autism a priority. With this timing, they were able to recruit 20,000 supporters and then bring them up the ladder of engagement with a 5-part welcome series in time for the Day of Awareness. Autism Speaks utilized our API connection with their CRM, so they were getting sign-ups in real time, and then they also had their welcome series automated. So far, the organization has reported above industry engagement rates, and then we look forward to hearing more about their ROI down the road. So here's email one. Email one was sent within 24 hours of sign-up. Like I mentioned earlier, timing is really crucial. It's short and sweet. You have to remember that people have short attention spans, so you want to get to the point of the email. They kick off this email by thanking supporters for signing on change.org, and that reminds the new supporters of where this organization got their email from. And then the call to action here is to watch a short video showing how autism differs from person to person. I also want to point out the signer, who's Liz Feld, president of Autism Speaks. Make sure that you use the person who signs the majority of your online communications, whether that's your executive director or maybe a program officer or even your development officer, so that you're building that familiarity. And then moving on to email two. Email two was sent 7 days after that first email. And here you can see that they, again, thank the user for signing up on change.org. It's always a good practice to keep reminding them of how you connected with them, because you don't want to assume that the supporters saw that first communication. Their call to action here is to join them on social media. And this is a nice 1-2 punch because you're getting the new supporter to engage and learn more, and you're also growing your social media base. And again, note that Liz Feld, president of Autism Speaks, is the signer. And next, email 3. Email 3 was sent 7 days after the second email. And here they ask supporters to take a survey. This is a really fantastic engagement tool because they're turning the tables and showing that they care about what their supporters think. It's also a good opportunity to collect data points to determine segmentation down the road. A great example of general survey questions that anybody could use would be something like, do you know someone who's been impacted by this issue? Or what's your preferred method of communication? Or how often would you like to hear from us? And then moving on to the fourth email. The fourth email was sent 10 days later, and it hit inboxes a few days ahead of Autism Awareness Month, which began on April 2nd. The call to action here is to raise awareness. They say that you can learn more by visiting their microsite Light It Up Blue, or you can wear a blue t-shirt or swap out your light bulb for a blue one in honor of Autism Awareness Month. These are all low bar, like I said. And again, they say thank you for signing on change.org. Just in case, other people missed emails 1 through 3 and they're coming in at email 4, they're like, oh, right, this is how they got my email. And then the 5th and final email, that was sent 10 days later, and this was timed to launch on World Autism Awareness Day, April 2nd. All of the subsequent welcome emails have led up to this final donation off. You can see that nice big blue donate button in the top right corner. And then notice that it's a $10 or more off. And that's because you want to start small with these new supporters. All right, so moving on to the second case study, we have Peter Deutschland. This is the story of how Peter Germany used email fundraising to incredible success. They needed to find new supporters online and convert them to donors, something that most organizations in Europe weren't doing because fundraising is dominated by face-to-face and direct mail. So they came to us and recruited 10,000 supporters. They developed a stellar welcome series and achieved full return on investment within 3 months with 200% projected ROI in just a year. These new supporters saw a 49% open rate across all 5 welcome series messages, which was well above their 20 to 25% average for their house file. And they also saw a 26.3% click-through rate, which is phenomenal. A whopping 5.6% of new supporters donated with an average gift of 25 euros, compared to just 1% of their overall list. And then for context, the sponsored campaign they'd launched on change.org petitioned Air France to stop transporting monkeys as medical test subjects. So taking a look at this first welcome email, as you can see, it's structured similarly to that first welcome email that we had for Autism Speaks. This first email was sent immediately to new supporters, thanking them for signing on change.org, again, making that connection. And then the ask here is to watch a 60-second video about the atrocities and share with social networks. So a really low bar ask there. And then email 2. Email 2 was sent 5 days after the first welcome series message. And their strategy here was to re-engage by asking supporters to sign another petition targeting the National Institute of Health to stop experimenting on baby monkeys. Now you can see that the common thread here is monkeys. And remember that when you acquire supporters through a specific issue, it's best practice to circle back to that topic because you already know it's something they care about. And next, email 3. Email 3 was sent 7 days after the second email, and this is where Peter Deutschland goes into the donation ask. They go about this by talking more about the baby monkey campaign that supporters had heard about in the previous message. And then Peter does a really good job here of developing an emotional connection, because this is the 4th time that these leads have heard about the mistreatment of monkeys. So at this point, supporters are like, I really want to do something to help, and how can I help? Email 4 was sent 10 days after the third message, so that provides a really nice buffer between the donation ask and then this follow-up. And the strategy here is to re-engage by circling back to the original campaign against Air France, and it directs them to a horrifying blog post that outlines Air France's cruelty against monkeys. And the fifth and final email was sent 10 days after that fourth email, again providing a nice buffer. And here they introduced a new campaign topic, which is the mistreatment of Angora rabbits for their wool. You can see at the top of the email that there's a video, and that's going to elicit an emotional response from the new supporters. Right below the video, there's a big red donation button. So this message is set up so that supporters watch the video, they have that reaction, and then Peter goes, well, here's how you can help. All right, so closing the loop. I want to quickly touch base on why these Welcome Series examples were so great. Number one, timing. They connected with their new supporters immediately. Timing is so important. I really cannot stress that enough. If you don't follow up with your leads in a timely manner, they're much more likely to unsubscribe once you reach out. And then number two, thanking new supporters. These are brand new people to your organization, and they took action and expressed interest in joining your mailing list. So make sure that you thank them. And then number three, there was a great use of call to actions in each email. You know, they led up with soft ask, and they led up to that very final donation ask. You know, that final hard ask doesn't have to be a donation ask. It can be any high bar ask, like volunteering or maybe calling their congressperson. I also wanted to add an additional observation that I had, and that's that we showed these two case studies for very different organizations. One was a US-based health organization that launched a campaign to raise awareness for World Autism Awareness Day, and then the other was an animal rights organization based in Germany that asked supporters to mobilize around the mistreatment of monkeys as test subjects. They're both really different organizations, and they're different countries, and they have different communication and fundraising strategies. But what is nice to see is that there's a common thread when it comes to onboarding new leads through a Welcome Series. And then before I go, I want to leave you with a homework assignment. If you've got a Welcome Series, ask yourself, does it follow best practices? And have I run A/B tests and optimized my content? Make sure you're not leaving any money on the table. And then if you don't have a Welcome Series yet, think about the key stakeholders in getting this process off the ground, and then existing content that you can use, and timing and volume. Thank you so much for joining us on this webinar, and make sure that you submit all your questions through ReadyTalk.
Thank you, Tammy, and thank you, Blake, for those presentations, full of really great information. And as promised, now we do have 20 minutes for Q&A. We have some questions that have been submitted already, but we also have time if you want to continue submitting questions to ReadyTalk. We'll answer as many as possible. Our first question is going to be for Blake. This question is from Michelle, who asks, what are recommendations on the best way to segment audiences? Or what are some survey questions you might ask to identify what kind of messages supporters might want to receive?
Okay, great. So very good question. I would generally guide you more towards what I would call self-selecting groups rather than survey questions. So for instance, if I go back to my cat and dog example, I can simply look at the stories that people click on, or the downloads that they get, or the information that they're requesting, and start to make assumptions as to what someone would prefer to see. In terms of what those specific questions would be, that's really dependent on the organization. And where I would start is going back to that idea of, what are those three criteria across those three axes? So again, I said interest-based. What are the things that people are interested in? Are they interested in long-term solutions or immediate relief, right? Do they want to put rice in the bowl, or do they want to teach people how to farm? So that may be applicable to a particular type of organization. So interest-based, activity-based, have I ever run in one of your events? Have I ever visited your facilities? And then the last is that catch-all, geographic, do I have children, etc. Finding out what those three criteria are is what will then lead you to what are the questions, and more importantly, what are the different sort of triggers I can look for that would allow me to put somebody into the appropriate buckets. So hopefully that answers your question. I can't tell you, because if I'm working with an animal organization versus a health organization versus a social service organization, it's going to be very different how we approach that. but the underlying structure is going to be the same. I'm going to be looking for those 3 criteria across 3 axes, and then I'm going to try to figure out how I can best determine that with the group I have.
Great. Thank you, Blake. Our second question is from Bobby. And the question is, what is the optimal length of an email? And I'll send this question to you, Tammy.
Hey, Bobby. So as I was mentioning during the webinar, people's attention spans are really short. And for that reason, we want to keep that email pretty short. So I would limit, especially with a welcome email, you want it to be graphic heavy, and you want to use really compelling graphics. If you have infographics, that's excellent. Some great imagery, but really keep it short. I would keep it to 3 paragraphs maximum.
Great, thank you, Tammy. Our next question is going to be going back to Blake. This question is from Amanda, who says, we have over 15,000 people in our database, but very few take advocacy action or donate, and they know very little about them right now. So what are some good steps for them to take with this big inactive list?
Okay, so I'm going to broaden that a little bit just because I don't know enough about your organization or how the list was acquired or things like that to be able to necessarily solve that particular problem. But I'm going to answer it more in the context of driving higher levels of engagement. I mean, we do often find people have pockets of individuals that are in inactive lists. And there's a couple of things you can do to re-engage them. Pivoting and trying a very different approach. If you've tried the same type of activities with them and they're not responding, you might look to get them to do a very different type of activity. So it sounds like you've been looking for them to take advocacy actions. You might want them to fill out a survey to say what do you think is the most important area that we should be focused on as an organization. Get them to feel like a stakeholder. And again, this is somewhat off the cuff, but the idea is more that I want to move away from something that hasn't been effective to perhaps either a lower barrier ask, and it's not about how technically challenged it is. It's not how many clicks it is. It's do they feel comfortable doing it? So I may want to just ask them for information. I may want them to vote in a poll or submit their own story or upload a picture. A lot of different things that I can do. I'm going to use an animal organization as an example again. One of my clients had a large pocket of individuals who had not donated, who had never donated, and they did a targeted micro-campaign to cat affiliated individuals. So they were using the dog and cat, and it was for a very small donation, and they mentioned that it was actually for kitty litter, to buy kitty litter for their particular shelter. They got a huge first-time donation rate out of this group, and the idea was that they had finally found something that resonated specifically with them. In the broader sense, I guess these people weren't comfortable donating, but then they envisioned a bunch of cats with their legs crossed and needed a place to go to the bathroom, and all of a sudden these very small donations came in. But it was a big breakthrough for them because they then were able to put them in the donor pool and continue to cultivate them. So you do need to pivot, try to figure out what those hot buttons are, try to understand your targeting and segmentation rather than looking at it as a list in its entirety. What are different groups within there? And then as Tammy talked about testing, some other types of activities.
Thank you, Blake. That was a great example. We have one more question for you. This is from Kelly, whose organization often sends out emails when there's relevant news, but that can be sporadic. So how often should we be sending out emails or communications to their supporters?
So again, I'm going to go back to what I said before, and this is something that I very am adamant about, which is your communication schedule should really be driven by relevance before frequency. So it's not about how often. I mean, obviously you want to be in front of people with some certain amount of frequency, but it's really about when it's relevant. I have worked with many organizations that say, well, this is really important news, but our newsletter doesn't go out until 2 weeks from Thursday, so we'll hold it for that. Absolutely not, right? If you've got important news, get it out. It can be an update. It can be a flash bulletin. It doesn't have to be an official newsletter. Many organizations are moving away from newsletters and more to these more timely and, as Tammy alluded to, shorter communications. Here's a blurb of what's going on. Check our website to get back. So it's really about the relevance and understanding what's meaningful to your audience, and as you start to target and segment, it becomes much easier to understand what would be relevant to those particular individuals. So I hope I answered the question, but there is no magic number that 7 is too many and 1 is too few. Obviously, if I don't talk to somebody for 6 months, I'm going to lose them, right? So, but if you don't have anything relevant that happens in your organization over 6 months, you have bigger problems than your email tool. So.
Great, thank you, Blake. The next question is for Tammy, who discussed the importance of testing during her presentation. And Chris is asking, what's the good rule of thumb on the size of your list in order to run a test?
Well, I wouldn't say that there's a magic number, but you do need volume because you want to make sure that you can reach statistical significance. You don't want to be testing a list of 10 people because I don't think that you're going to get anything statistically significant from that. So make sure that you've got the volume to run that test.
Great, thanks, Tammy. The next question we have is also going to be for you, and we have 2 similar questions. The first is from Vanessa, who's asking, is it okay to have a welcome series that is general for new supporters, or should they all be campaign specific? And Taryn has a similar question that says, are there any suggestions for how to make a broad, ongoing welcome series?
So a general welcome series is great. That goes back to the evergreen welcome series that I'd mentioned during the webinar. And then you can just tweak it for specific campaigns. If you have an evergreen welcome series and then you know that you're going to run an acquisition campaign on change.org, you can just edit that very first sentence to say, thank you for taking action on change.org. That way you don't have to reinvent the wheel. All you need to do is kind of like repurpose your content. And then in terms of suggestions for that evergreen welcome series, it's really just a matter of following those best practices. Making sure that you're thanking your new supporter, making sure that you're making a connection with them on where you grab their email from, and then having call to actions in each email to make sure that they're engaged and learning more about your organization and being inspired.
Great, thank you, Tammy. The next question we have is going to go back to Blake. This question is from Ziggy, who asks, the first email we send new signups is a request to double opt-in. Is that a wasted opportunity?
The answer on that is going to really depend on how the names were obtained. But if they were obtained what I would call organically, that they came and signed up for something on your website, I don't think you need to do a double opt-in. If you were involved in some email append or some other programs, then obviously you're going to need to do a double opt-in. But I would segue more towards this idea of getting a welcome series in place so that as soon as someone signs up, I'm able to tell them more about my organization, what we're working on, where we've been successful, and where we need help, so that I can pull them much faster into that engagement loop as opposed to the double opt-in, which can be somewhat off-putting and not necessarily a great first experience.
Great, thanks, Blake. And the next question I'll actually pose to both of you. This is a question from Amber, who asks, what are the best ways to move people from online action takers to in-person action takers?
I'll jump in there, and then Tammy, you can reply. So, I hate to sound evasive, but so much of this is situational and contextual that it would depend on what it is that I'm trying to do. But I would just try to move people through that cycle and say I'm trying to get them from website visitor to email sign up to first action taker to, well, I'm going to call it an online team captain, right? So maybe they help organize or they help promote on social media. Whatever it is, what I'll be looking for is indicators that show me a high level of interest, a high level of involvement. Once I've identified those people, it starts to become a much more manageable list. If the particular thing you're looking to do is relatively heavy lifting, what that can do is give you a pool of candidates that it's worth you reaching out individually, perhaps even over the phone. So again, I don't know if you're talking about scale or high-level involvement. I have worked with organizations that did a similar approach that I just outlined, that They got people to do several online activities, each one a slightly higher ask, and after people got about past the third or fourth activity, it was a much smaller pool. They actually reached out to them individually over the phone to get them to become local neighborhood organizers. So they still went back to some old school techniques, but they used their online marketing program to get that down to a manageable list of potential prospects. So again, it kind of depends on what it is you're trying to do, but that is one approach.
Totally agree with what Blake just said. It's really about moving these new supporters up that ladder of engagement. Like we talked about on the webinar, leading in with software off and kind of looking into your email reports to see who's been taking action, and then taking those people who are who are the most engaged, and then asking them to take this much bigger action, in person.
Great, thank you. The next two questions I'm going to sort of combine into one for Tammy. And the first part is this is from Steph. Is there a right amount of days to leave between each email? So how do you want to space out your welcome series? And a question from Amber on, are there any tips on compelling subject lines that can draw people into opening up these emails?
I wouldn't say that there is an exact right amount of days to leave between each message. It really depends on the frequency of your messaging. If you're an organization that messages a lot, then maybe 5 days is fine. But if you're somebody who only sends one email out every month, then maybe 10 days is better in between each message. So use your best judgment, because you know your online communication schedule. And then in terms of subject lines, again, it really depends on the tone and voice of your organization. Like, how do you talk to your supporters? If you have a really casual tone with your supporters, if you guys were signed up for President Obama's email list, a lot of the time they have a subject line that just says, hey, and every time it gets me, because I'm like, oh, is this my friend? And I click on it and I'm like, no, it's just President Obama's email team. Another great way is to use dynamic salutations. So, you can use your CRM to pull in a user's first name. So say, Tammy, we need you to take this action, and because I see my name, I'm going to be much more likely to open that email.
Thank you, Tammy. Our next question is from Blake, and this is a question that a few people have asked, so maybe we can go a little bit more into answering this. The question is, for understanding your audience's interests, how would an organization go about collecting that information?
Okay, so I think we had a similar question, and again, I'll point to, obviously I can ask them point blank, right? And so there's a couple of ways to do that. I've often advocated for groups to use what I would call a two-part sign-up form, so that when they're initially signing up, I ask for the very minimal amount of information, name and email address, and then the next page they're taking to, basically their confirmation page that, hey, thanks for signing up, which is what we often will put up, actually has additional questions on it. These then become optional, so that I could ask them, what areas are you most interested in? What type of work are we doing that you think is the most relevant? Whatever is appropriate to your organization. I can ask them in that format, and I don't have to worry about scaring them off from the sign-up. The last thing you want to do is build a really heavy intake form that you're trying to use to grow your email list, because it will obviously suppress your response rates. But if somebody abandons that second page, I still already had them signed up. So you can do that two-part type of form. I can also do it in the autoresponder that goes back to say, hey, thanks for signing up. You're in our email list, blah, blah, blah. By the way, tell us a little bit more about you. I can do it when they hit the website. A lot of different ways I can present those surveys. But I think it's also as critically important to find ways that you can just infer that data. So downloadable content, right? Here's our guide on reducing your carbon footprint, and here's our guide on being a responsible environmental consumer. And knowing who downloaded which one, I can immediately start to check those boxes as areas that they're interested in. Knowing who clicked on which stories, those sorts of things are things that go far beyond just the surveys.
Great. Thank you, Blake. Our next question is also going to be on testing, and we're going to send this back to Tammy. Sherry says that her organization does a lot of testing with a pretty large sample of 24,000 people, and they only ever get about a 2% difference. So is there any advice in getting significant results from their testing?
So if you feel like you're not reaching statistical significance, I would say just run different tests. Maybe the subject lines or the images you're testing against one another are too similar. So you're not seeing that statistical significance. So yeah, make sure you're testing things that are quite different from one another.
Great. Thanks, Tammy. The next question is also going to be for you, and this question is about users who unsubscribe. So Nita is asking, if people are signing off your mailing list, should you only be paying attention when you see large numbers of unsubscribes? And is there any way to do outreach to these unsubscribed supporters in the future?
I would recommend that you are constantly keeping an eye on your unsubscribe rate. And first of all, you want to know what's the average unsubscribe rate of your existing list. It's going to be normal during an acquisition campaign, during the onboarding process, to see a higher number of unsubscribes. Like, that's okay. But if you consistently see a number that's above your average, then maybe, that's a little bit alarming. I do not recommend reaching out to people who have unsubscribed because they have explicitly told you that they no longer want to be communicated with anymore. However, further down the road, if you notice that you've got a portion of your list that is inactive, and I would describe people as inactive as people on your email list who haven't taken any actions in the past 6 to 12 months, actions being like opened an email or clicked through even. And you can create a re-engagement strategy for them to try and bring them back into the loop.
Great, thanks, Tammy. The next question is going to be for Blake. And this question is from Kate, who asks, are there CRMs that handle the type of segmentation discussed today well? So Blake, maybe you can speak a bit about the kind of segmentation you can do through Salsa.
Yeah, I was going to say I'm probably not a completely unbiased person to answer that. Obviously, I'm excited about what we can do here with the Salsa tools and how they can help your organization. The things that I talked about today, you can do within Salsa. You can create different types of groups. We actually have a concept of smart groups and greedy groups and other things. Lots of different ways to help you do that. I certainly won't say that we're the only ones that can do it. There are other systems out there. I wouldn't be able to speak to the capabilities of those other systems, though.
Great, thanks, Blake. I think we have time for one last question. So I'll open this to either you or Tammy, whoever wants to answer this. And the question is, what do we have on stats in terms of the best time of day to email, or any stats on emailing over the week or over the weekend? Blake, do you want to take the first stab at this?
Again, I think I will say this is sort of indicative. I think everybody wants to have the silver bullet, right? If I send 7 emails and I always send them on Tuesday, then I'm going to get this great response. It really, in my opinion, comes down to kind of the context, the situation, and the type of supporters you have. So if it's urgent messaging, it needs to go out urgently. If it's not, some people will tell you Tuesday morning, some people will tell you Monday. I think it comes down to testing, paying attention to what's working for you, what's not. Obviously Sunday night might not be the best time that people are going to see it. But I'm reluctant of giving people a false sense of security through rules of thumb that may or may not be applicable. With some guidance within there, and then it really comes down to what's the situation, what's the context of this messaging, who am I sending it to, and so on and so forth. So a triggered campaign is going to go off whenever the trigger happens. If I sign up tonight, I want to get the email response tonight. But if you're planning a campaign, what's a kind of a natural trigger that it might be top of mind for someone, and so on and so forth. So again, not to be evasive, but I think that's probably, at least from my perspective, the advice I would give people.
And I completely agree with what you said as well, Blake. So many clients ask me this same question, and I always tell them there's no magic answer. The answer that I tell a lot of people is that the best time to send an email is when you're ready, because you don't want to rush that email and make mistakes and then send it out. So, make sure that everything looks great, make sure it's been tested, and that your segmentation is set, and then you can hit send.
All right, thank you for those answers. So thank you to everyone who put in questions. That's all the time we're going to have today. So a big thank you to Blake and Tammy for taking the time to share their insights with us, both for the presentations and for the Q&A. There have been a few questions about whether or not we're going to send out a recording of the webinar for those who had to leave early. We will be sending everyone who registered for today's webinar a recording of the presentations and the Q&A. Be sure to keep an eye out for that in your inboxes. If you have any questions we didn't get to answer today or any other thoughts from the webinar, feel free to reach out to either the email addresses in the slides here, and we'll get a response to you as soon as possible. So thank you again for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you next time.